In 1099, the First Crusade reached its climax with the siege of Jerusalem. The primary objective of the Crusader forces was to capture the city, which was under the control of the Fatimid dynasty. Led by Godfrey de Bouillon, Raymond IV of Toulouse, and Baldwin IV, the Crusaders embarked on their campaign with strong religious motivations. At the time, Jerusalem was ruled by the Fatimid governor, al-Nasir Dawood. The city was heavily fortified, with strong defenses and strategic positioning. However, the Crusader forces believed that with the right strategy, they could breach the city's defenses. The siege began in June 1099. The Crusaders prepared by gathering supplies and constructing war machines, including siege engines and other weaponry. These preparations were essential as they faced a well-defended city. The Crusader commanders devised a strategy to cut off Jerusalem's supplies while continuously attacking its walls. They employed siege machines such as catapults and ballistae to weaken the fortifications. The defenders of Jerusalem, though outnumbered, resisted fiercely to protect the city. The initial assaults failed to breach the city walls, which were heavily fortified. As the siege dragged on, the Crusaders began to struggle due to dwindling supplies and harsh conditions. After several weeks, reinforcements arrived, bringing additional supplies and enabling the Crusaders to intensify their attacks. They constructed additional siege towers to enhance their chances of breaking through. Nearly a month into the siege, the Crusaders finally breached the city gates using larger siege engines. Once the gates were overcome, the Crusader forces entered the city. The capture of Jerusalem was followed by intense violence. Many inhabitants of the city, including Muslims and Jews, lost their lives during the takeover. The events that unfolded remain one of the most widely discussed aspects of the Crusades. Following the conquest, the Crusaders established the Kingdom of Jerusalem, a Crusader state that would govern the city for nearly a century. Godfrey de Bouillon was appointed as its ruler, though he declined the title of King of Jerusalem and instead chose to be called Defender of the Holy Sepulchre. The siege of Jerusalem had a lasting historical impact. The city remained under Crusader rule until 1187, when it was recaptured by Muslim forces. The events surrounding the siege continue to be studied as part of the broader history of the Crusades and their influence on interfaith and geopolitical relations. In 1187, the Kingdom of Jerusalem, established by the Crusaders, faced a major challenge. Saladin, the leader of the Ayyubid dynasty, sought to reclaim territories under Crusader control, including Jerusalem. In preparation for the decisive confrontation, Saladin launched a series of strategic offensives against Crusader strongholds across the Levant. In July 1187, the Crusader army, led by King Guy de Lusignan, mobilized to counter Saladin's forces. They marched toward Tiberias under difficult conditions, suffering from a shortage of water and supplies, which weakened them even before the battle began. Saladin employed strategic maneuvers to counter the Crusader forces. Using misinformation and swift attacks, he disrupted their coordination and gradually encircled them, limiting their ability to retreat or resupply. On July 4th, 1187, the Battle of Hattin commenced. The Crusader army, already exhausted, found themselves trapped on difficult terrain with limited access to water. Saladin leveraged the geography to his advantage, cutting off supply routes and forcing the Crusaders into an unfavorable engagement. The decision to engage on terrain that offered little strategic advantage contributed to the Crusaders' defeat. Deprived of water, fatigued, and without reinforcements, their forces were ultimately overwhelmed. King Guy de Lusignan, along with many other knights, was captured. Following the battle, Saladin extended terms for surrender to the remaining Crusader forces. Many accepted the conditions, leading to their release, while others were taken as prisoners. This decisive victory paved the way for Saladin to reclaim Jerusalem. In October 1187, his forces entered the city with minimal resistance, bringing nearly 90 years of Crusader rule over Jerusalem to an end. Despite his military success, Saladin demonstrated leniency toward the inhabitants of Jerusalem, particularly the Christian population. He permitted them to leave the city safely ensuring a more orderly transition of power. The victory at Hattin not only altered the control of Jerusalem, but also reinforced the influence of the Ayyubid dynasty in the region. Meanwhile, the defeat prompted renewed efforts in Europe, leading to the launch of the Third Crusade and further military campaigns in the region. The Battle of Hattin remains a significant moment in the history of the Crusades. Saladin's strategic planning and leadership played a crucial role in reshaping the power dynamics of the medieval Middle East, highlighting the impact of military tactics and diplomacy in historical conflicts. After the fall of Jerusalem to Saladin, the Third Crusade began. On the Christian side, Richard the Lionheart, King of England, emerged as a key leader. Saladin, while in control of Jerusalem, faced renewed military pressure from the Crusaders. Forces led by Richard, Philippe II of France, and Frederick Barbarossa of Germany. Richard the Lionheart arrived in the Holy Land in 1191. Known for his military skill and bravery, Richard swiftly focused his efforts on reclaiming key strongholds, including the city of Acre, which had become a central point of conflict. The siege of Acre was one of the most significant battles of the Third Crusade. Richard led his forces against the city, which was defended by Saladin's troops. After a prolonged siege marked by intense combat, Acre fell to the Crusaders in July 1191. Following the victory at Acre, Richard set his sights on Jerusalem. However, both his army and Saladin's forces were weakened from the prolonged fighting. Recognizing the toll of war, Saladin proposed a temporary truce, opening the door to diplomatic negotiations between the two sides. Saladin offered terms of peace, suggesting that Jerusalem remain under Muslim control while ensuring religious freedom and safe access for Christian and Jewish pilgrims. Richard carefully considered the offer, though many of his supporters still pushed for a full military conquest of the city. Despite the diplomatic efforts, Richard was reluctant to abandon the goal of reclaiming Jerusalem entirely. Weighing the military risks, he continued advancing south, though his forces were strained by limited supplies and fatigue. Although Richard achieved several tactical victories along the way, he ultimately could not capture Jerusalem. Saladin maintained control of the city, using strategic defenses to hold off the Crusader forces. In 1192, after months of inconclusive battles, Richard and Saladin reached a peace agreement. Under the treaty, Jerusalem would remain under Saladin's rule, but Christian pilgrims were granted safe passage to visit the city's holy sites. The agreement became a notable moment of diplomacy during a period of intense conflict. Despite their rivalry, both Richard and Saladin earned the respect of their followers, not only for their military leadership, but also for their ability to negotiate and find common ground. After the peace agreement with Saladin was reached, the Crusader forces began withdrawing from the Holy Land. While they did not capture Jerusalem, the victory at Acre and Richard's diplomatic efforts were considered significant achievements. After concluding his campaign, Richard returned to England. Although celebrated as a hero by his supporters, his prolonged absence and the immense cost of the crusade sparked political tensions and criticism within his kingdom. For Saladin, the Third Crusade also had lasting effects. While he successfully retained control of Jerusalem, the prolonged warfare took a toll on his health and placed added strain on his administration as he worked to maintain stability in the region. Despite the truce, the Holy Land remained a focal point of religious and political tensions. Although open conflict subsided for a time, rival factions continued to seek influence over Jerusalem, and intermittent hostilities persisted in the following years. Richard and Saladin left behind a legacy of military leadership and diplomacy. Although they fought on opposing sides, both leaders earned respect for their strategic thinking and their ability to negotiate terms that allowed for a temporary period of peace. The Roman Catholic Church played a significant role in supporting the Third Crusade, promoting it as a religious mission. However, in the aftermath, Some questioned whether the objectives had been fully achieved, given that Jerusalem remained under Saladin's control. Although the Third Crusade did not result in a decisive shift in territorial control, its impact on Europe was considerable. The conflict reinforced Richard's reputation as a military commander, but also placed economic strain on European states, which had shouldered the heavy costs of war. The Crusade also influenced the ideals of knighthood in Europe. Concepts of chivalry, honor, and courage in battle became more prominent, with Richard the Lionheart emerging as a legendary figure who inspired future generations of knights and warriors. Historians view the Third Crusade as a turning point, where diplomacy began to play a greater role in the Crusader campaigns. While military engagements continued, leaders increasingly recognized the value of negotiation in pursuing their objectives. The long-term impact of the Third Crusade extended beyond the battlefield. While it did not result in major territorial changes, it demonstrated the possibility of diplomacy amid conflict and shaped the evolving relationship between Christian and Muslim rulers in the years that followed. The Ayyubid dynasty was founded by Saladin in the late 12th century after he took control from the Fatimid dynasty in Egypt. Saladin led with determination to confront the Crusader forces in the Holy Land and strengthen his rule in the Middle East. Saladin was known for his strategic military leadership, combining tactics of warfare and diplomacy. One key strategy was dividing his forces to counter the Crusader armies on different fronts, gradually weakening their influence. After his victory at Hattin, Saladin turned his attention to Jerusalem, which was under Christian rule at the time. As the Crusader forces prepared to defend the city, Saladin advanced with careful planning and organization. The change in control of Jerusalem was a significant event that prompted many European leaders to launch another crusade in an effort to reclaim the city. Despite leading a strong military campaign, Saladin was also known for his diplomatic approach. He sought to minimize unnecessary bloodshed by offering peace agreements to the Crusader forces remaining in Jerusalem. The Battle of Hattin, fought in 1187, was a crucial moment in the Crusades. Saladin's victory in this battle paved the way for the transition of Jerusalem's leadership. Following the victory at Hattin, Saladin demonstrated clemency toward prisoners of war and defeated soldiers, allowing many to be ransomed or released. His approach to leadership earned him recognition for his sense of justice and mercy. The Crusades had a lasting impact on the social and political landscape of the Middle East. While Saladin succeeded in uniting vast territories, the conflicts between different factions continued to shape the region's history. After taking control of Jerusalem, Saladin implemented policies to maintain peace and ensure the safety of all pilgrims. The city was managed with a focus on stability and coexistence. Saladin's legacy remains significant in both Islamic and world history. The Ayyubid dynasty, which he established, continued for several decades after his passing, and his contributions to history are still studied today.